4,049 hours. That's how many hours I have clocked in PlanetSide 2 in the 11 years that the game has been out for. And by the way, that doesn't include time spent on the test server, on special event servers, or on characters that I've since deleted. So it goes without saying that this game has been a very big part of my life, a big part of my career as a content creator, and has allowed me to form friendships that I still hold dear to this day. But is the PlanetSide franchise coming to a close for good? Is the game now in its death spiral? G'day there once again viewers, your mate Kamikaze78 here, and today we revisit the PlanetSide franchise for what I fear may be one of our last times. So, since I last made a video about this game here, we've been a busy beaver with BattleBit and have welcomed over 18,000 new subscribers to the channel. There's a good chance that a lot of you don't even know what PlanetSide 2 is. So allow me to kick off this video with some context and introduce you to what in my view could have been one of the greatest FPSs of all time. PlanetSide 2 is an MMO FPS. Yep, you heard that right by the way, a massively multiplayer online first-person shooter game. Truly the only game of its kind, PlanetSide 2 had the goal of simulating a three-way, futuristic sci-fi war on an alien planet between three distinct factions, each of which brought their own weapons, vehicles, and looks to the battlefield. The game at launch would accommodate 2,000 players on a single map, with there being 4 maps potentially open at one time on a single server. So yeah, you potentially had 8,000 players per server fighting it out on these 3 factions and on these giant maps. The game would go on to eventually include infantry, ground, naval, and air vehicles. The battles would rage on for days on end, and sometimes you would log back into a server days later, only to find that your faction had not moved an inch. It all sounds cool in theory, right? And in fairness, this is what occurred in the game for its early years, and it was very cool. A competitive scene that sported a variety of formats and player counts also started to find its footing in the community thanks to the game's well-developed gunplay system and great social features that allowed large groups of players to form communities and communicate effectively. But you fast forward to today, and you're greeted by desolate servers that in some cases struggle to maintain more than 100 player averages per month, a failed console port that hasn't received an update in over a year, maybe even longer, and a failed spin-off sequel that was shut down almost immediately after its launch, with no sign of a follow-up sequel. All of which, I would argue, are symptoms of, well, misguided development efforts, concepts that were brought to the table and introduced to the game far too late in its development cycle, and ultimately, a core experience that wasn't strong enough to entice the majority of its prospective players to stick around. And to me folks, it sadly all points towards the end of an era, the end of the PlanetSide franchise. Despite its unique ideas and seriously impressive vistas and views at times, I think it's very much worth starting to accept the fact that we may be staring the barrel of death of PlanetSide. And as much as it pains me to say that, it doesn't really surprise me, folks. I'm someone who's been overtly critical of PlanetSide 2 over the last year or so, really speaking to some of the glaring issues in the game's core design, and why I believe it was the reason for players leaving the game as soon as they gave it a go. And upon my return to the game this past weekend just to try it out and see what was happening, after playing a lot of other FPSs in that time, man, those problems became so much more obvious to me with a clean palette. One of the things that stood out to me in particular, almost immediately even, is just how much time I spent either looking for a fight or traveling to the combat in a territory upon finally getting to the fight. If I died and there was no one around to revive me, more often than not it meant a 10-second wait in the spawn screen, followed by a 20 to 30-second run back to the fight, depending on how close the nearest spawn was. And given PlanetSide's design, where players on the attacking side of a fight are responsible for handling and managing their own spawns to keep the fight going, it meant that, more often than not, spawn locations were ages away from the actual combat, and it meant that the ratio of actually engaging in combat versus, getting to the combat was so skewed in the wrong direction. There was a moment on the stream where we were playing the game and I said, we've been running around for a while, hey? And chat collectively agreed that, yep, the pacing was all off. But beyond that, all of PlanetSide's core problems still stuck out to me like a sore thumb as well. Stuff that I've been talking about for years, quite frankly. The fact that population imbalance and completely crushing a fight is the most efficient way to win the game that also sucks the FPS element out of the game. The fact that vehicles continue to have no real objectives in the game other than farming infantry or killing spawns, creating a power dynamic that makes them nothing other than a frustration and an intrusion to the gameplay that the majority of players are going to be having. And if you do get to the point where you're having a somewhat stable fight and there's a little bit of back and forth there, most of the fights take place in choke pointy, overly claustrophobic environments that have nowhere near enough room to house the kind of battles that the game is seeking to accommodate. All of these are issues that take away from PlanetSide being a solid, enjoyable first-person shooter game, because that's ultimately what PlanetSide 2 is at its core. I've copped all kinds of copium over the years from many players telling me that, nah bro, it's not an FPS, it's an MMO, and therefore these aren't problems worth focusing on. No, just stop that. This is a game that puts you into a first-person perspective, gives you a gun, a weapon, and tells you to go shoot people. This is a first-person shooter game. The MMO side of the game is the setting in which the game takes place, and with that comes a lot of social elements that do add to the overall experience. But the first-person shooter side of the game is what makes up the core gameplay loop. It's the stuff that you're going to be doing over and over again. And I'm willing to bet my bottom dollar that most prospective players who came to this game came into it on the pretense that it is a first-person shooter game and that they were looking for a first-person shooter experience first and foremost. I've been accused of projecting this mentality in the past when it comes to that point of view, but if that were the case, if I was truly projecting and the majority of people were coming to the game to stay blissfully immersed in the game's social aspects and the back-of-the-box moments that, say, the MMO side generated, then I'd argue the game would still be thriving today. But it's not, because you can't have a game bank on that entirely without good gameplay backing it. But yet, despite this glaring issue in keeping players around, the core FPS side of PlanetSide 2 continues to be below par after all these years. New players and veteran players alike were vocal on the issues, sharing feedback in both constructive and, well, I'll be honest, not so constructive ways, yet PlanetSide's latest major game update was focused on the construction system, albeit shoehorned in system that in the long term continues to really do nothing for the majority of the gameplay experience and only really impacted a small populace of the game's, long-standing population. And a lot of PlanetSide's updates seem to focus on these really niche features without addressing the core issues. And then the one major update that we did have that addressed the sort of core FPS element of the game by adding new weapon attachments, rebalancing a lot of the weapons, improving infantry combat as best they could, saw a huge spike of long-term, long-lasting players, probably the largest spike that the game had seen in the later stages of its life. Which to me just really proved that there was an appetite from the community to focus on this side of the game here. And yet it seemed to be a one-off occurrence that really wasn't focused on again, which again seems a bit strange to me. But what shocked me even more at times though was some of the community's reactions to the critiques around the core FPS side of the game. When you've got thousands of players bouncing from the game on their first few sessions every day. And then on top of that, you've got big content creators in the community writing off any of these complaints that were raised as just another pussy that couldn't cut it. I feel like there were some elements of people burying their heads in the sand about PlanetSide's big problems. Ultimately, the flawed gameplay loop, with a constant focus on big picture back-of-the-box feature updates, I think has done nothing short of pigeonholed PlanetSide into this corner that sees it entering a bit of a maintenance mode death spiral. The game's competitive series, Outfit Wars, has not been run this year once again, despite getting a major redesign only last year, which means, again, more dev resources down the drain in this game. And we are also yet to hear any news around the game's 11th anniversary update, assuming that any news or any update is coming at all. And even if we did hear any news, it would have to be the most monumental announcement to even warrant getting players back. But I now look at the state of the game, the population, how little updates are coming to it, the general sentiment in the community, and all I can think is, this is it. I don't think there's any hope for PlanetSide in the future. So, as someone who has often held the opinion that PlanetSide 2 was still a game worth trying despite its age all these years, unfortunately, in 2023, this is the first time where I fall on the conclusion that no, PlanetSide 2 is probably not worth your time nowadays. You'll be met by frustrating battles, low server populations, and quite frankly, there are just many other FPS games out there that are simply more worth your time. And I know that as a content creator for PlanetSide 2 for years, I'm going to get comments along the lines of, Cammy, by making a video like this, you're just killing the game even faster. What are you doing? Quite frankly, folks, I'm not going to lie to people. There's not much in the way of value for coming to play PlanetSide 2 in 2023, especially as a new player. There are simply far more games out there that are, battling for your attention that are still getting active developer support, have stronger core gameplay loops, and are quite frankly just more fun nowadays. That's not to say that if you're still enjoying PlanetSide 2, you can't keep enjoying the game. Of course you can. That's what the game is there for, and while the servers are still up, you do you and enjoy it while it's there. But as someone who gets comments constantly about PlanetSide 2 content and where it is and what I'm doing with it, unfortunately folks, there just isn't that much in the way of value for playing PlanetSide 2 nowadays. And I am more than happy to be proven wrong. If RPG come out tomorrow with a big announcement saying that they're working on a sequel, then hot diggity dum, you have my attention again. But until then, and quite frankly I don't think that's ever going to happen, there's just not much reason to play this game in this day and age with the current state of it. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's also a pill that's worth swallowing in my view. Anyway folks, on that rather solemn note, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know some of you probably didn't, but hey, you can't impress everyone. If you did, a backhand of the like button does go a long way to supporting the channel, and if you're new here, consider subscribing whilst you're at it. We're doing a lot of first-person shooter content of a wide variety on the channel here, and it would be great to have your company. And as always, all my social media links can be found down below. Come follow us on Twitch, Twitter, and join our community Discord. It'd be great to have you guys there too. Once again guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Peace out, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Take care guys, have a good one.